Welcome to Tales She Told Me, a podcast featuring honest conversation about what it means to be a woman, a mother, and in business. I'm your host, Farrah Haidar. Today, we will be discussing empaths, and joining me is Jennifer Moore. Jennifer Moore is author of Amazon bestseller Empathic Mastery, founder and head mistress of the Empathic Mastery Academy, and host of the Empathic Mastery Show podcast. She's a master trainer for EFT International and a mentor and healer for other highly sensitive empaths. Intuitive from the get-go, Jennifer experienced her first prophetic dream when she was 9, and she's been navigating her extrasensory awareness ever since. Supporting intuitives, lightworkers, and creatives to use their abilities for good is Jen's greatest passion. So, welcome, Jen. It's so good to connect with you. So empaths, bit of an esoteric topic. I'm sure you get a lot of questions about it. But what I hear about a lot, and it's so interesting that you said you had your first prophetic dream at 9, because I think that's, I hear that from a lot of people, like 9, 10 seems to be that
Yeah.
triggering
Yeah.
point.
Which makes sense hormonally,
Yeah.
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 Because you're sort of in that, sort of like pre-menarche stage as a
Mhm.
girl, especially. And it's sort of like those hormones and sight and intuitive ability, I think, have a connection. So,
Okay.
you
Yeah,
know,
I'd love to hear more.
yeah,
So why don't we start with the basics, since we might have some people listening to the show
sounds
who
good.
even the basics is like, so is everyone an empath of some sort?
No,
Or
no.
so explain, what is an empath?
Okay, so let's start with the definition. So first off, as you were saying, it may be esoteric, but it's kind of becoming like popping up like mushrooms everywhere.
Mhm.
And so you got a lot of people who are now identifying as empaths. So first off, I just want to say that the word empath is not a clinical term. It is not a psychological term. It actually comes originally from science fiction. And most people probably had their first encounters with the concept of empath in Star Trek, either in the original episodes. There was actually an episode called The Empath,
Mhm.
and it was about a character who basically had the ability to absorb the pain of Kirk, McCoy, and Spock and transmute it for them by taking it on herself. And her name just ironically happened to be Gem, and my name happens to my initials happen to spell out Gem. And then we've got Deanna Troy as well. But even before that, there was actually a science fiction story written in the 50s called The Empath. And that's where this term came from originally. Now, what has happened though is that original book was about people who had the ability to kind of intercede other people's emotions and actually influence people's feelings and thoughts and energy by their ability. And so where the story originally started as sort of a character with nefarious purposes, very soon after in the 60s, when Star Trek kind of took the name on or the word on, it became something very comparable to what we imagine now, which is an empath is, at least for me, this is my definition, a being, not necessarily a human, who picks up the thoughts, the feelings, the energy, the sensations, and often the struggles and the pain from the world around them. But unlike somebody who might be intuitive or psychic or a medium, where they pick up information, but they know they're picking it up from the outside world, empaths process the information as if it is their own. And so, for example, if somebody is intuitive and psychic, but not an empath, and they say walked into a space where somebody had been feeling deeply sad and been grieving all morning or something, the psychic or intuitive is going to walk into the space and go, wow, this place feels really sad. And may or may not have the ability to know why it feels really sad. The empath is going to walk into the space and go, why do I feel so sad all of a sudden?
Mm.
And so the thing about being a highly sensitive empath is that often we are feeling feelings that are not our own. And if you live in a lot of cultures, but particularly I think in America, there's a lot of, we tend to kind of pull ourselves up by the bootstraps and not necessarily um have a lot of space for feeling and for processing emotions. There's a lot of like, suck it up or don't make such a big deal out of it. And so in my travels, in the hundreds, if not thousands of other empaths that probably thousands of empaths that I've spoken to and encountered over the years at this point, what I have noticed is that pretty much other than one person that I interviewed for my podcast, every single person I've ever spoken to has had the experience of being told that they are too sensitive, that they are overreacting, that they are taking things too personally, that they're making things up, that they have an overactive imagination, and that they just need to get over it. And the challenge with this is that we then think that the problem is ours and we need to fix ourselves. And so, one of the reasons why I love being on podcasts and I wrote the book and I'm doing all the things I'm doing is that it is debilitating to pick up the thoughts, feelings, energy, and sensations from the world around you, to be feeling really overwhelmed and just consumed by the intensity. And then to be told, this isn't going on, this isn't real. You just need to, there's something wrong with you and you need to fix yourself. And the problem is, if the issue really is that one is picking up all the energy that people are picking up, or we are picking up stuff from the outside, and we're being told that it's inside, you can't really fix something if you're looking in the wrong location. And
Mm.
while ironically, I'm a very strong believer in we got to do our own inner work, and it all comes down to personal responsibility. But part of personal responsibility with an empath is the ability to recognize what is ours and what is not ours, and to not take on the stuff that is really not ours, that is not ours to deal with and process. So that's a
I-
big mouthful.
yeah.
So I imagine I've given you a lot to run with here.
Yeah, a lot. One of the questions that comes to mind is, have you ever encountered anyone who was an empath but didn't know? They just assumed everyone felt that way.
Yes, absolutely. A
Mhm.
lot of people. And also because of the invalidation, because of the, you're just overreacting, you're taking it too personally, you're making a big deal out of all of this. A lot of people will just assume that they are high strung and emotional. They will assume that they are, that and sort of like, oh, if only I could get sort of emotion, control over my feelings.
Mhm.
And so a lot of the people that I've worked with over the years don't necessarily recognize themselves as empaths, but they might know they're different. They might know that they are a little bit more sensitive than other people. And, they might have many of them have some kind of a spiritual orientation or leaning, but not everybody who is an empath necessarily identifies as an empath or recognizes themselves as an empath immediately. The other thing that I was thinking to clarify is that while there is definitely distinctions in my experience between psychic, medium, intuitive, and empath, you can be all of them. That it's not like they're not all mutually exclusive. And so a lot of times, empaths, when they are getting overwhelmed by all the thoughts, feelings, and energy, will have a very hard time discerning what's going on. But as they develop, or we develop more ability to protect ourselves, to process the information more effectively, then what interestingly happens is a lot of times our psychic abilities and our intuition really expand and become enhanced, while what I call empathic overwhelm starts to decrease.
So how can you tell if you're an empath? Like, I know it
That
sounds
is
like a
the
weird
million
question.
dollar. No, it is not at all. It is the $1 million question. And it's a really important question. So, in my experience, one of the ways that many of us experience, or that we can start recognizing that we're empaths, it's a two-parter. But the first part is that you often find yourself, and okay, so I'm going to backtrack and I'm just going to say that in order to recognize who we are and what we need to have the willingness to do our work, and we need to have the willingness to look at our own stuff. So if there are a lot of skeletons in the closet and there's a lot of stuff that you are pushing down and suppressing, or just like you're just not ready to deal with it, but maybe there's like some nasty clowns in your closet, then it can be very hard to recognize whether the feelings that are coming up for you are actually coming from triggers of your own or from what you are observing, or I mean absorbing. So, saying that, there is a point where if you are really new in the healing journey, where it's a lot harder to recognize what's mine and what's not mine, because we are often just, especially very early on, it's like triggers can catch us unaware. So, that said, at a certain point, when you start recognizing what are your triggers, what are the things that are gonna make you pop and send you over, send you into the deep end. Once you have that understanding, when one of the things that's very common is you're chugging along, you're doing fine, you're having your day, everything is the way that it needs to be. And all of a sudden, you start to feel absolutely, like, just overwhelmed with some kind of emotion or intensity that you feel out of sorts, you feel wonky, you feel disoriented, discombobulated, but for no obvious reason. Like, and then maybe you've done some of this work, so you scan it and you're like, "Okay, did I have an encounter with mean girls that's triggering my, like, inner adolescent? Did I have a weird conversation with somebody? Was I on public transportation and picking up things?" And so we start sort of scanning through and just kind of being like, is there a possibility that I picked this up, or that something triggered a reaction within me that got me sort of feeling a certain way? And if we keep coming back with, no, I did not get triggered, then the next question is it possible that I absorbed this? Is it possible that there was something going on around me, or maybe even going on somewhere else on the planet that is affecting me? And what I will say is that for many of us who are empaths, the way we start recognizing ourselves as empaths, and this is kind of part two of the answer, is when we start seeing the correlation between feeling really out of sorts and then finding out that something had been going on, either in our immediate vicinity, say a friend is going through a health scare or something, and all of a sudden we wake up feeling really, really anxious about our own health. That's something that I've known people to literally go through. And then they have a conversation later in the day with a friend and they're like, "Oh yeah, I had to go in for this procedure and I was feeling really terrified." And they start describing everything that you've been feeling. And so one of the ways that we can start recognizing ourselves as empaths is when we start seeing the correlation between the feelings and the thoughts and the stuff that's going on for us and something that is going on in the outside world. And so it is often a process of deduction, but it's also this thing of, and then when it comes to sort of that idea of absorbing things, as we start noticing that we're feeling out of sorts, what I really love to do is put my hands over my heart and just really ask the question, is this mine? And a lot of times the answer will either come back both. It will come back like, yes, some of this is yours, but a lot of it is not yours. And then what I like to do is ask the question, well, then in that case, what's mine? What's not mine? And once I have more of a clear sense of what is mine and what's not mine, then it's my job to take responsibility for the stuff that is mine, but to not take responsibility for the stuff that isn't, and to really let it go. Now, this is obviously, I mean, I wrote a 380-page book about what it means to be an empath, what are the tool, and the tools that we can use to transform this. So to, try to break it down into sound bites about how do you recognize you're an empath, it's a little bit more complicated than that. And there are definitely many qualities that people are empaths often tend to have. So, for example, in addition to feeling out of sorts or strange or weird or walking into a room and suddenly feeling very sad, very scared, very angry, or just having these sort of unnameable or un, un I don't know, like it's sort of like we can't find the origin of. So I'm not going to say undefinable, but we can't find the origin of just these sort of like coming out of nowhere feelings. There's also empaths tend to be very sensitive. A lot of times there's sensory processing things that are happening for empaths as well. So a lot of times empaths are sensitive to sound, they're sensitive to light, they're sensitive to texture, they're sensitive to smells. It's not uncommon for empaths to have food sensitivities, environmental sensitivities, as well as not all empaths, but a lot of empaths can end up with a lot of sort of chronic health issues, autoimmune issues, because basically we are, it's like the indoor is larger than the outdoor, and we often, and also like the funnel is bigger for the what it's taking in than than the container that it's going into. And so often what is happening for us is that we are getting more information than we can effectively process at any given point in time. So I could go on and on about characteristics of empaths, but I'm imagining that if somebody's listening, I've given you enough information that if you're like, yeah, I can really relate, that this kind of hopefully will sort of start you down the quote rabbit hole unquote in terms of looking at, oh, maybe I really am an empath.
So, listening to you, I have a lot of questions. And one of the questions, I was always under the impression that with being an empath, it's really about like being physically close to that emotion. But you're saying no, it doesn't have to
No,
be a
not at
physical
all.
proximity.
Yeah, and that's a spectrum in the sense that there are some people who have to be in the physical vicinity of something that, like, if they've got a bubble of space between them and somebody else, they're going to be just fine. But there are a lot of people who are picking up the thoughts, the feelings, the energy, and the sensations that are coming from across the world. Like, there are people who are in America who, when the world war broke out in Ukraine, were feeling it and feeling the terror and feeling the fear and feeling the distress. And there are people, I mean, I know that with 9/11, I remember vividly having a panic attack about 10 days before 9/11 happened, to the point where, and I don't usually use any medication, but I had a stash of like three Xanax that my mom had given me that had been sitting in a plastic bag in my upper dresser drawer for a couple years. And it was like, I was like, I think I need to take like, it was either Ativan or Xanax, but I needed to take some kind of sedative because I was so distressed. By the time 9/11 happened, it was almost like I sort of forgot until like about a day later. And then I was like, oh yeah, that was what that was. I have known a number of sensitive people who, about anywhere, and this is the other thing, a lot of times, like in the same way that rabbits or other creatures can often feel like the rumble under their feet of an imminent earthquake. I believe that we can feel the rumble of events that are coming, because time is, I mean, if you go into metaphysics and all sort of the woo world, a lot of people, and even if you start looking into like quantum physics and and stuff like that, people start talking about the fact that time is an illusion. And so when something really large happens, I really think of it as like it's like a blast that, the intensity of it ripples out across time, and it impacts not only the future, but the past. And some of us will feel that. And so often people who are highly sensitive will start getting this sort of feeling of uneasiness and like something's coming. And then maybe 5, 10, 15, 20 days later, you're like, oh, that was what I was picking up on. And sadly, I wish that shootings were not so pervasive in this culture, but that seems to be, in my personal experience and in the travels of many of the people I've spoken to and worked with, that seems to be one of the things that people or that many of the empaths I know can sense in advance. But to go back to the you need to be in the vicinity, some people may. Some people may need to be right in the vicinity of another human being or an animal or a space to pick things up. But many of us will be picking things up that could be happening like across the planet. And some people may even be picking things up that are outside, like that are within the solar system or in the galaxy for that matter. I am very grateful to say that I am not one of those people, but there are people who are just, and there are some people who are so sensitive that the ability to even recognize where they sort of fit in time, like they're picking up information from the past, picking up information from the future, they're picking up information from in the present moment, but they're picking it up from all over the place. So in my experience, and going back to what I was saying before, it's a spectrum. You can have some people where they have to have their hand on somebody to feel something or to know what's going on with somebody. And then you can have somebody who just like all they need to do is wake up and they know what's going on with Aunt Sally, like, 20 states away.
Well, one of the reasons I brought that up was because, I think about protection and protecting yourself as an empath. And I think, oh, well, maybe at least you can get some physical relief, if you're
Yeah.
physically, but if not, I mean, that's brings me to the question, I guess, of, how do you protect yourself? How do you stay sane?
Yeah. How
You
do you stay
know?
sane?
Yeah.
Well, and that's why this is a 380-page book. The first part of the book is all about what is an empath? Why are we this way? What is the impact or the ramifications of being this way? And how does this impact us and affect us? The second part is the 5-step system, which the subtitle is 5-step system to go from emotional hot mess to thriving success. And the 5-step system is basically what I have discovered we need to be able to do in order to make changes. Because putting up a ball of light, because a lot of times, one of the first things many of us are taught on sort of a spiritual path is like, put up a bubble of light. The problem with this suggestion is that if you've already absorbed a lot of negativity, if you've already absorbed a lot of intensity, and you put a ball of light up around it, it's kind of like putting gasoline in a pressure cooker, or it's kind of like taking a shower, leaving the bathtub plugged, and having dirty water in the bathtub, and then just pulling the curtain around. You're not dealing with the issue that's inside. So, what I've discovered is that basically, before we can really protect ourselves, the first step is we need to recognize what's ours and what's not ours. And so, the first step of empathic mastery is recognize. The second step is release, because if we're carrying around other people's stuff, no amount of bubbling up with light is going to cut it. The third step then becomes protect, which is both about our physical, energetic protection, where we do create some distance and some space, but it's also about our boundaries. It's about things like, it's 11:30 at night and you see that a crazy drunk text just came in from your like particularly uh unstable, let's say, family member. And it's like you get to decide, are you going to run with the crazy, or are you going to, are you going to pick it up and engage with their drama, or are you going to say it's 11:30 at night? No, I can deal with their shit later. Excuse me. I hope that's okay that I just swore. Yeah.
It's all right.
But
It's not a problem.
I can deal with their stuff later, or not at all, because it's not my monkey and it's not my circus.
Yeah.
And so, so that protection, in my experience, is both, first is clearing the stuff that would be inhibiting our ability to feel safe and protected. And then from there, both creating both energetic and physical boundaries as well as strategic boundaries about how we're going to behave. The fourth step is connect because the universe abhors a vacuum. And if we want to change what we are feeling in the world, we need to be connecting to something different than everybody's distress. So that's about connecting to positivity, connecting to a power greater than ourselves. You might think of it as divine source, God, goddess, like, your mileage may vary, but connecting to something larger and recognizing and moving beyond the ego and into the heart. And then the final step is act. So all of these work together, and act has to do with living impeccably, living in a way where we are making deliberate conscious choices about not rushing into rescue when we haven't had consent, about holding, like putting, pumping the brakes and hitting the pause button before we start going down the rabbit hole. Because one of the things that I've noticed happens for many of us is that when we do not know what we are, we will often, if we feel distress, we'll sort of send our little feelers out into the world to try to understand what's going on with it, what's happening. And when we don't know any better, that is an innocent thing we do. And we often will end up sort of picking up and taking on and coming home with more than we expected or bargained for. But once we understand what we are, there gets to be a point where there's a line between sensing that something's going on and then actively seeking out the information and reaching out to try to find out what's going on. And that's one of the places where we get to make a choice to approach things differently. Like, just because somebody is distressed doesn't mean that it is our job to sort of telepathically, psychically, energetically, emotionally probe them for what's happening unless we have permission, unless we have consent. And so there is a certain amount of learning, owning ourselves, and then making different choices, even to the point of things like, as I was saying, like not answering text messages at 11:30 at night, but then also things like curating our relationship to social media so that we're not being exposed to, just a lot of divisiveness 24/7, as well as being really mindful about when are you going to consume the news if you are somebody who watches the news and engages with that. Like, how are you engaging with current events? How are you getting information? When are you choosing to get that information? And being really mindful of the things you do have a choice about, the things that you do have control over. Because a lot of what protects us is actually learning how to calm our nervous systems down and regulate our nervous systems. Like, that's a
Mm.
really big part of this. Because when we can regulate ourselves, we are substantially less likely to spin out than if we are already dysregulated and then kind of resonating with the anxiety and distress that is going on in the world around us.
So I have a question here. Can you choose to not engage? Like, can you turn it off, the ability?
So, in my experience in having conversations with a lot of empaths, it doesn't work that way.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, you can't necessarily turn it off because what I've noticed happens is, I mean, and in my podcast, there's a couple cautionary tales from people who, especially in their adolescence, like they had maybe, 9, 10, 11 years old, they had a distressing prophetic dream. And instead of being a weirdo like I am, where they were like, I just had this dream about my best friend's mother dying. Wow, I must be psychic, you know? And I was like, I just was like, I was like, more, let me learn more. My understanding, there is a lot of people who, when that happens to them, they go, I do not want to know any of this. And they try to stuff it down. The problem with stuffing it down is that if you just stuff it down, if you just shut it down, it's sort of like that you're still going to get bombarded with, it's like you're still getting bombarded with something, but it has no channel or way to process it. And so a lot of times what ends up happening is that people end up developing like they end up sort of either feeling like all the color has been dialed out of their life. Like you can't shut down one part of yourself without shutting down the rest of you too. Like you don't get to choose what you don't get to choose what you're going to be sensitive to. If you shut down the sensitivity, it's like every aspect of life is going to get shut down and it's going to get dialed out. So there's a dullness and a flatness that a lot of people tend to experience when they shut it down. But also, I have heard this enough. Then, and this is obviously anecdotal, but I've heard this enough times that I say that this is very likely is that for many people, the attempt to shut down empathic sensitivity actually causes health issues, mental health issues, where, it's like they start, it's sort and as well as crises, accidents, situational things where life just stops working or isn't working, as well as substance abuse, habits that are not serving us. And so, in my experience, the key to dealing with this is actually dealing with this. And we can live a joyful, wonderful, amazing life where we get to do the thing we are here on this planet to do, be of service on this planet, and really make a difference. And not, what and process, by owning our identity and making the choice and being mindful of the fact that as like we may need some special care and feeding, but when we honor that and we recognize sort of the limitations as well, like the gifts and limitations of being a highly sensitive empath, we can like it's really really spectacular. So I would say that many people would probably, if you ask many people who recognize themselves as empaths, how's that going? If they went through a period where they did try to shut it all down, most people I've ever spoken to are like, yeah, that didn't work so well. So I wish I could say, yes, it's possible to just shut it down and not have to deal with it. But, being human, we have to deal with being human.
That's really interesting because yeah, it's interesting for me because I at 9 I had a very prophetic dream, but I was just like, I'm not engaging in this stuff anymore.
Yeah.
And I it, I don't know. I don't know if it's worked or not. Maybe I'm just I don't know.
I mean,
Anyways, it is what it is.
things have a tendency to come out sideways. When we
Yeah.
don't deal with them directly, they have a tendency to come out sideways. And often also, I mean, I think what's so sad is that we live in a culture. I don't know about your experience being 9 and having a prophetic dream, but with my, at my age, I didn't get a lot of support for that. I was pretty much told like there was nobody in my world who was like, "Oh, you're a little baby psychic. You're a little baby empath. Let's give you some tools to deal with this." I was just kind of like I mean, I was left with like the little 5 and 10 Woolworths, little tiny pocket guide to witchcraft called Witchcraft and How to Do It. Like that was about all I could find. And then I had there was also another little pocket guide called ESP where, it was like just, but, and the maybe 2 shelf section on the paranormal and the occult in the library in my hometown. That was all I had. That's all I had access to. And at that point in time, all that stuff was weird, was pretty weird. It was pretty woo. And it was not mainstream at all. Like people thought it was really out there. And so, and I didn't have any adults or older peers who were there in my life normalizing it. And I'm imagining that was probably true for you as well. So, I mean,
So I grew up in the Middle East, so it's a little
mhm,
more it was a little different in the sense I think that people are more open to the woo.
mhm,
But it's definitely not approved of or
yeah.
encouraged at all. It was interesting. I didn't tell many people about it. I think I was just like, "Oh, this is a sensory thing that I have," and you know, it didn't really happen again, so maybe
Mhm.
I don't know. Maybe I just had a weird dream and that was it. That might be it, but it didn't feel that way at all. Um, so I guess now, do you think it's different now that people are more accepting or more open? I mean, you definitely hear it talked about a lot more than
way more.
when, yeah,
I mean, just look at, I mean, I think there's degrees of acceptance within it. I mean, I do still think that we live in a world where there are plenty of people who are, scientists who look at all of this stuff and think that it's hooey because it can't be proven, it can't be quantified. I personally believe that where we are at right now is that we are experiencing stuff in terms of like the subtle body and the energy that we will eventually come to being able to scientifically explain this. We're just not there yet. But I mean, I do think that. I mean, we have had incredible progress with things like quantum physics. We also, like, all you have to do is like go on Canva and look at all of and like type in spiritual or type in witchy or type in crystal or type in priestess or type in empath, and you will get all kinds of graphic assets that reinforce this idea. That alone, the fact that there is like that if you're that there are is there's just tons of like decorations for being for being a magical person, for being woo, means to me that what used to be very much the outliers, like very much like you had to go, to get like magical jewelry or a tarot deck or, tools, you had to go to the one magic shop that was like in your state or in your, if you lived in a larger metropolitan area in your city or in your town. And, it was a weird shop that smelled like, like smelled like incense and lentil soup. And it was, and there was this sort of quality to all of that where it was like, and only the weird people went into those places. Now it's like, you can go to Walmart and buy a tarot deck. You can go to Target and buy like crystal jewelry and
but
stuff.
has that kind of ruined it? Like, like there's a new crystal shop that opened next to me, and I was super excited because it's kind of like, oh yay. So I went there and my friend was with me. She's like, they don't take care of their crystals. They're all dusty. They don't clean them. Like,
Oh,
and it was super just commercialized. It was
yeah.
kind of like, and I was it made me kind of sad. I'm like, no, no, So I agree with you. It's definitely become more mainstream, but I think we might be losing some of it
I think
in
that
the
I
mainstream.
think that we've lost. I mean, and this actually goes into a much larger conversation about just kind of marketing and the whole, like, it used to be, and I'm imagining you've had some experience around marketing and, and
Sure.
coaching and things like that. It used to be that what people were looking for when they were seeking support and a healer or, any professional was credentials and qualifications and skill, you know and unfortunately, in the last like 10 to 15 years, maybe 20 years tops, the marketing world has basically placed influencer status over skill, wisdom, experience, and credentials. And one of the things that I was taught when I was first learning about marketing and running a business was that people don't want to hear about A, your process, or B, your credentials. They want to know what you can do for them. But the problem with this is that as a result, there are a lot of people who are offering solutions who have absolutely no credentials or qualifications other than some life experience and a desire to help or a desire to make money in some cases that would actually make them qualified to offer the kind of support or the kind of skills that they have. And I think that the thing is that when I was a kid, I grew up with a sense of you respect your elders, you honor you honor the journey, you honor the apprenticeship, you honor the hoops you have to go through, the initiations you have to go through to become skilled at what you're doing. And one of the things I've absolutely noticed is that in sort of the larger woo new age world, that you get a lot of people who just like buy their first tarot deck and within, 3 to 6 months put up their shingle claiming to be a psychic because there is not necessarily as much information out there about what it takes to become um, a master in this work. And so I think that that's part of the problem is that we don't really have professional standards anymore for skill that, that our culture there. And so I would say that things are both commercialized, but also there's a lot of dumbing down that has happened and a lot of like, hey, if somebody can write a good piece of ad copy, they're just as entitled to offer their service as somebody who has spent, 5 to 10 years training in this modality.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I would agree. So, Jen, I'm just looking at the time. I want to make sure I want to get you out on time. So,
Okay.
I have this question that I ask everybody that comes in, and it is, what is a weird habit or ritual you have that makes your life more joyful?
It's really funny because this may not really sound that weird at all, but this is like the thing that immediately came to my mind is that every single morning I get up and I have this beautiful, I wish I had it here, but I have this beautiful blue 20-ounce like water coffee tumbler, one of
Mhm.
those insulated ones from this company called Iron Flask that makes these gorgeous tumblers. And so I have this beautiful tumbler and I have a coffee drip thing. And I have this really great organic decaf that I get from this wonderful local organic company called Dean's Beans that's just a couple states away from me. If
Mhm.
you're ever looking for good organic coffee, serious plug for Dean's Beans. Their stuff is
Mhm.
the bomb. Anyway, and I just stand in front of the counter and I hit the kettle and I start boiling the water and I pour the boiling water over the grounds and I just have this ritual of preparing my coffee and putting in don't eat sugar, so I put in some like monk fruit and some stevia to sweeten it up a bit. And then I usually pour in cream. And and then it's like, I just have this experience of just kind of like I land with my cup of coffee and usually then also my pug Lilu, who
Mhm.
is taking a nap at my feet right now, but will usually just like jump up onto my lap and just sit with me. So every morning it is sort of this ritual of prepping my coffee and hugging and holding Lilu and just kind of easing into the day that way. And, people talk about, and I choose this actually for a reason, because people often are talking about like spiritual rituals and what do you do in the morning to ground and how do you get there? And what I realized is that for me, my coffee ritual is my first spiritual ritual of the day. And it's my anchor. It's my way of settling in. I don't meditate for a half hour. I don't do yogic breathing for any long period of time. I might go for a walk with Lilu shortly after, but it's like the coffee is my ritual.
Mhm.
And I think a lot of people have this idea of what they think it's supposed to look like, and even in the
Mhm.
question, like, what's the weird thing you do? And I'm like, I'm not sure it's that weird, but it is the thing that brings me like an incredible amount of joy and
Mhm.
delight. And who would have thought, like, one
Yeah.
thing of coffee in the most beautiful, like it's a gradient from like dark, like almost like indigo to teal on the top.
Mhm.
Or like it's like a turquoise on the top. It's so pretty.
Mhm.
And that just brings me joy.
Yeah, no, it's, sometimes it's the simple things. So,
Yeah.
Jennifer, it was a pleasure having you. And if you're out there and you'd like to hear more from Jennifer, make sure to visit her website, www.empathicsensitivity.com, where you will find the Empathic Safety Guide, 3 basics for finding calm in the eye of the storm. Jennifer's ebook that gives empaths, intuitives, and highly sensitive people a set of tools that they can use as soon as they download their copy. Of course, all links in the show notes below. As always, I'd love to hear from you about this episode. Do you think you're an empath? Let me know on Instagram or Facebook at Farrah Haidar. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you'll get notified when a next episode is available. Also, I'm giving away a PDF of some of the best quotes we've had on the show, beautifully designed to print and journal your thoughts. Email me at farrah@farrahhaidar.com and title it Quotes. Talk to you soon. Till then, chase your happy.